Thank you very much. How much time do we have for this? Hour and a half. Okay, so let me suggest that, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. Let me suggest that I speak for a little while. Let's say maybe 20, 30 minutes. I engage in a non-academic monologue, which I don't think should be allowed on an academic setting anymore, but I will rape your intellect. But then I'll promise that the 2/3 of the time should be really a debate, whatever you... I will try to be provocative enough to induce questions with you. Okay, so this is sort of an attempt to introduce an open discourse on how to sort of try to look for new models. The problem, of course, with economics is that it employs a factor which is called mathematical modeling, which is why this book was important for me, because David Orrell is primarily a mathematician who does one of the most complicated mathematical models, which is the chaos models of weather forecasting. It's ironically the most complicated mathematical models today are employed in weather forecast. And of course, the fact is that with 50% likelihood, the weather tomorrow will be the same as today. That's your safest shot, and 50% of the time you will be right. And meteorologists are trying to do the best they can to move this up to 80%. Now, what has always surprised me is why don't we see the probabilities when you watch the news and they say tomorrow it will be raining. Why don't they say with what probability? So, you know, sometimes it's quite clear, 99% tomorrow it will be raining. Other days the model is very sort of fuzzy, so we're not sure, but most, well, let's say 16% it will be raining. The problem is the following. I just had a debate in Zurich 2 weeks ago with an economist who does exactly these models for large companies. And he told me an interesting story. He said that his bosses came to him and said, we want to know the situation of the Swiss economy in 30 years. To which he, of course, said, this is nonsense. This cannot be done. It is absolutely impossible. I will not do it. It's just, I mean, no way I can do this in anything that will even remotely pretend to look like science. But anyway, the bosses insisted. So he said, okay, the only thing that I can do is I can come up with scenario models. So he developed 38 scenario models. In one, you know, the oil will run out. In the other, there will be wars, etc. Europe will fall apart. I mean, these are chances that we cannot even ascribe probabilities to. It's simply an event which we cannot say it's a 16% probability that the war in Europe will start. You can't assign. This is the difference. This was the main sort of input that Keynes had in the study of economics, the difference between uncertainty and probability. Uncertainty you simply cannot ascribe a probability to. It's an event that is non-repetitive, and it's an event that we don't... If you're throwing a dice, you can either throw it many times and from that derive that the probability of number 6 or number 5 falling is 1/6, or you can just study the shape of the cube and you can see that just by looking at the cube, you can see, okay, I can see that the probability of the one side falling is in 1/6. So you either have to have a line of occurrences in order to be, in that case you don't really have to understand the event. Or, for example, sunrise and sunset. Yeah, there was a line of occurrences. Every morning the sun rose. So, of course, our forefathers did not really need to understand how come this planet, is it evolving around the sun, or is the earth, or is the sun? We didn't need to know. Simply we had a line of experimental or empirical observations, and that was enough. So you can predict the future even without understanding the phenomenon, but you have to have a line of of observations. This is, of course, something that came under very heavy criticism, and observably so, by many. Most known of them would be the black swan from Nassim Taleb. Just because an event happened many times in the past often increases the probability of this would not happen again, which is the famous example of the Christmas of the Thanksgiving. What do they eat in America for Thanksgiving? Turkey. Yeah, so turkey is getting fed every day, thinking that tomorrow, of course, it will be even better and more food. Only the next day was Thanksgiving, and that was the end of the feeding. There was no way that the turkey could have expected this. The other way is if you understand the logic of the phenomenon, and in that case, you don't need to have the line of, if you look at the cube, everybody will be able to say, okay, the probability of number 5 falling is 1/6 without having to even throw the dice. So anyway, so this guy, to come back to the story, he came to the board and he said, okay, so I have 36 scenarios. You pick one or you tell me which one you want to go. And the answer was, give us the most likely one. So the next day he said, okay, this is the most likely one, but it is very unlikely that it will happen. He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, the probability of this one happening is 1.8, which is a little more than every other because there the probability is below 1%. But as you can see, the probability 1.8 also means that it's very unlikely with 98% that it will not happen. But it still is the most probable outcome. And this really puts the ridiculousness of the whole exercise to the upfront. Now, let me kind of go back into why we even think this is possible. Because if you look in theology, this is very useful in theology. We have had more than 2,000 years of very complicated debates whether God or the highest intelligence, who knows the velocity and position and intent and the aim of every single quantum or quark in the known galaxy, whether such a being could predict the future. This is a theological debate. It has been a very difficult debate, and towards now it most likely looks like that even God cannot see the future. Quoting Alfred North Whitehead, the future is radically open even for God. Why? Because there is a basic element of human freedom. In other words, these two things cannot coexist. Either human beings are free. Now we are discovering that even photons are, in a way, free to decide whether they keep their quantum state or whether they actually collapse the wavelength into a particle. But that's a different topic. So the future is absolutely unknown, most likely even to God. The only exception is economists. Sociologists will not so readily talk about the future. I mean, would you ask a sociologist, when will, I don't know, discrimination of females end in Honolulu? And they would say, of course, yes, this is, let me see, Honolulu, I see, okay. The 16th of May, 2026, plus minus 3 days. Even when you talk to lawyers, they cannot be certain how, each legal case ends up. But economists know with a precision to the 100% how much GDP we will produce next year, not to talk about inflation, unemployment, and etc. Where did we adopt this? Well, David Orwell wrote a beautiful book, which I recommend to you, and it's called Economyths. And there he talks about myths that we economists believe in. My contribution is I will try to sort of maybe describe how these myths are made. And what's more important to me from a philosophical point of view is not that we deal with myths. That would be a better option. I think the situation is far worse. We don't treat those myths as myths. We treat them as facts. Many philosophers ironically agree that we live today in a post-ideological time. Nothing could be more fundamentally misleading than this statement. We today live in the most fundamental of times. Why? Because we believe we live in a post-ideological time. In other words, in the past, people were actually aware of what they actually believed. A stupid example, every Sunday you would go to church and you would actually repeat to yourself, I believe in Father, okay. These are sort of things that I believe in. You were aware that that's a belief. Today, we consider these beliefs, or different beliefs, to be facts. And that is, of course, the home run of every ideology, is to not even be questioned as an ideology. And this is how this happens. Today, we are ashamed of our beliefs. And of course, for example, I don't know, how do we deal with beliefs in science? To take the most difficult of all examples. Well, my thesis is that what we do is we shift the beliefs into the context, making the very hard, for example, a model, look extremely hard. So we push away the soft, and we keep the hard, and the hard pretends to be extremely scientific, numeric. Two ways how to look at it. A funny way how to approach this is the story from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You know that in this book by Douglas Adams, human beings were sick and tired of philosophers debating about the meaning of life, universe, and everything. So they constructed, how many people have read the book actually? So, okay. So they construct this machine called Deep Thought, and this machine is huge. It's a computer, and it is made to calculate, to give us the answer to the meaning of life, universe, and everything. So this computer says, okay, I understand the question. Give me, I don't know, 2 million years to calculate the answer. It's a very difficult question to calculate. So the machine goes into a sort of a deep sleep, and there it calculates it. In the meantime, of course, philosophers and others go on strike because they fear that once this question is resolved, they will lose their job. And exactly. After a couple of million years, this machine wakes up and says, okay, now I have it. I have the answer to the ultimate question of the meaning of life, universe, and everything. So the whole multiverse gathers, and they in a great celebration and great expectations, they finally look for the true, objective, scientific, mathematical, 3 times QED, QED answer to the meaning of life, universe, and everything. And the computer says the answer is 42. Yeah, what do you say to that? Why is this funny? Because this is, I think, in a way, how we want the truth to look like. We want it to be exact. We want it to be mathematical. We want it to be objective. We want it to be not influenced by beliefs and done by some models that we don't really understand. This is our sort of idea of the truth. What's the price to pay for this? The price to pay for this is that the answer doesn't actually make any sense because it misses the context. Let's zoom in economics. Or this is how actually, another example, this is how Paul Samuelson does it. How many of you are economists? Don't be ashamed, I'm an economist myself. Okay, so you know Paul Samuelson, for the rest of you, is sort of the Bible of economics. For 50 years, this is how economics was taught. This is the basic trick of Samuelson. He, for example, wants to show that human beings, well, whatever, doesn't matter. This is the method. He wants to show something, and he gives a mathematical, meticulously detailed proof in which he sort of shows very, even I would say, trivial, simple issues, but he shows it mathematically. For 5 pages, he goes on, then he pauses, and then he says, And because we assume that human beings are free and rational human beings, we can continue. And he continues with mathematics. And on the 17th page, okay, QED, I just proved to you that this is mathematically correct. What's the problem there? Well, wait a minute. You just spent 12 pages showing a small little detail of mathematical logic, which is sort of quite easy to see even without the proof. And in one sentence, you dealt away with the huge topic of whether human beings are or are not really free agents. This is a topic of thousands of philosophical books. Whether human beings are rational or not is something that we have been debating since the time of Plato. And you can't really spend 12 pages on meticulous mathematical details and then swallow with one sentence a whole problematics of human freedom. But because it's embedded in mathematics, it looks that it has been proven beyond doubt, beyond any normative statements, because that's an absolutely normative statement. Let's get back to the example with 42. What's the problem there? Well, the problem there is that the price you pay, the number 42 doesn't make any sense. Why? Because the context is missing. Where is the soft? Where is the normative in economics? Well, it's hidden in the word is. So when we say human being is rational, that's a normative statement. Because, hello, you can't just assume it away. And it gets even worse. Let's take an example how physicists deal with their myths. Okay, so when a physicist wants to calculate the free fall of an object, he assumes no friction of air. This is, of course, a stupid assumption. Everybody knows that, thank God there is friction of air, otherwise we would immediately explode. But it's sort of an as-if game. Let's pretend, let's in a way also a little bit lie in this specific case. Because, why? Because of calculation. Please realize also that all these assumptions are done for one reason only, and that's to make calculations more simple. If we didn't need to calculate it, we wouldn't have to make all these sort of assumptions. It's a special purpose vehicle for calculation. Otherwise, all these assumptions are not necessary. So he makes an assumption of which he knows that it's stupid, that it's unrealistic, and that it's sort of a trick to trickster the nature, and he's aware of it. An economist makes a similar case. I want to calculate how human beings consume, for example, or share their time between leisure and work. So I assume, like the physicist, that human beings are rational. So far, so good. The problem is when these two later on go into the pub in the evening, and the economist says to his philosopher, you know what we discovered today? That human beings are rational. This is fine, as long as you know that your myths are myths. The problem happened somewhere between the laboratory and the pub, where this guy believed his own myths that he himself or she herself created for calculation purposes only. It would be like the physicist entering into a pub saying, hey, you know what we discovered today? There is no friction of air. And to demonstrate it even more fully, there is a huge difference between saying, let's assume human beings are rational, and saying human beings are rational. To demonstrate it, there's a huge difference between saying, let's assume I have $1 billion, and saying, I have $1 billion. There you can feel it immediately. With the first case, I can come to a pub and say, let's assume I have $1 billion. And you could say, in that case, we could buy an island. And I say, yeah, and in that case, I could buy a nice little pool made of Coca-Cola. And we could maybe give a little bit of money to the poor. And how about building a castle out of, chocolate? While we're there, why don't we have a huge... And you could dream forever until the waiter comes and says, okay, get out. it's time to go home, and then of course the dream collapses and we say, that's the sort of a dreaming that we do in economics. We start with a small little assumption, human beings are rational, or any other, and then we sort of dream, but the waiter doesn't come to slap us, but we continue in this dreaming. Also realize that we scientists, we work in a dreamlike setting. This whole method of scientific discovery started with René Descartes with his book called Meditations on the Principles of First, meditation on the Principles of First Philosophy. He's still called science philosophy, first point. Second point, let's take this word seriously. Maybe meditations really were meditations, because if you really go into it, he is trying to get away from his emotions. He's trying to liberate his body from his from the senses. This is sort of what you do in a meditation. And then he dreams. His first method of scientific discovery is he dreams. How do I know that the real is real? Because in a dream, I also see a tree. In a dream, I hear a tree. Maybe you also had a dream in which you had a brother or sister, which in reality you never have, but the dream gives you an impression that you always had a sister. I don't have a sister, for example, but I have a few dreams in which I was dreaming I have a sister, and the dream also gives you the memory of having a sister. And you can come to the tree and you dream that you can touch it, and etc., etc., etc. So the method that we still use in science is dreamlike. When you construct your model, you're really closing your eyes and you're sort of working in a little bit different world than what you see around you, in fact. It's a castle constructed in a dream world, which I'm not saying is not useful. In physics case, it's very useful. But we have to know that there is friction of air, because if you want to, when you want to calculate, for example, how a leaf of paper falls, there you cannot assume friction of air away. But the physicist is not making philosophical claims like the economist. Realize that the assumption of rationality is a technical assumption, and then in the evening it becomes a philosophical or even a theological, if you want, statement. Solus, who was a pre-Socratic philosopher, once said a beautiful sentence. He said, myth is something that never happened, but it's happening always. So in this way, it doesn't really matter whether Adam and Eve really had an ID 001 and 002, and what's important is that the story is reacted and relived by those who believe it on an everyday basis. Now, have you ever met Homo economicus? Have you ever met a perfectly rational human being? No, but then again, everybody is. There is, in fact, nothing you can do to cease to be a Homo economicus. This is, of course, for those of you who do methodology of science, this is the first sign of a tautology. It cannot be disproved. This is an example. Well, I start with a simpler example, how we economists work with tautologies. For example, this is not my idea, I wish it was mine, but this idea I borrow from Joachim Baumann, an MIT, PhD from MIT, not MIT from PhD. And he has this beautiful example in which he talks about the truths of economics. So one of the big truths of economics is that human beings react upon incentives. Yeah, this is something that is a very sort of meticulously discovered thing that we now preach. The only problem is if you look into any dictionary and you look at the definition of the word incentive, you will find out that the definition of the word incentive is to what people react. So the sentence people react to incentives basically means that people react to what people react to. Which is true, yeah, but doesn't really help us, because It's a tautology. The same thing happens with the maximization theorem. People always maximize their utility. Well, if you take the word maximize and utility, those are strange words, and you look into the dictionary, basically what you are saying, the sentence is saying nothing more and nothing less than people do always exactly what they do. And they never do what they don't do. This is the meaning of the very clever sounding people always maximize their utility. What's the problem? Well, if I include, well, we can get to it in a debate if it's not. So how do we do it? Again, we push the normative, the philosophical, the religious, the beliefs into assumptions, making them appear harmless, but in a way, without these assumptions that are extremely soft, the inside would not make any sense. A stupid example, if I say of a woman, she's like a flower, what do I mean? Well, scientifically, this sentence makes no sense. Because female and flower, nothing in common. One does not produce photosynthesis, and the other one doesn't talk, to start with. So scientifically speaking, she equals or is like flower is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Yet when I say it, we all understand what it means. Why? Not because of the sentence itself, but because of the context. In our culture, it happens to mean that she's not green and all other things that she is not, but that she is beautiful, tender. We don't even mean that she smells nice, which is maybe the last thing that a flower and a woman could have in common. So what's the truth of the sentence, she is like a flower? Not in the sentence, but exactly outside of the sentence. In fact, if I wanted to scientifically compliment a woman, I would have to say, oh, today, darling, you are 98% beautiful. Your lips are 16%, but you really make it up with your hips because your hips are 99.9. I've only seen 0.1% of girls that have better hips than you. This is how a scientist should actually speak the truth. But of course, this, I tried. It doesn't really compliment anyone. So the truth of economics is not in the model itself, although it looks like it, but it's in the surrounding. So our answers are very similar to the 42 answers. So let me conclude, because I promised I will not speak for long. This is how we smuggle individual, normative, religious beliefs into economics, making them look like science. And that's the problem exactly. So when Paul Samuelson writes in the introduction of his book, and this you can find in any economic textbook, what's the point of this book? Well, to think like an economist. Okay, which one? Keynes, Schumpeter, Marx, Weber, or was Marx not an economist? Or how would you, or are you perhaps saying, Mr. Samuelson, that you want us to think like you do? Because that's the honest, I want you to think like I do. More honest would be to believe like an economist. Because we economists, unlike anybody else, believe in human rationality. If you don't believe in human rationality, it is very hard for you to do all these exercises. Have you ever noticed that there is not once anywhere defined the word utility in any economic textbook? Those of you who do economics for 3-5 years, we differentiate it, we are calculating utility without really knowing what it is. It's a very strange word, and that's why we use it. If we would put happiness, it would immediately sound ridiculous. If we would put goodness, it would immediately sound ridiculous as well. Utility sort of is a strange word, and that's why it works. So when Milton Friedman said, economics should be a positive science, what sort of a statement is that? Is that a positive statement? It's a normative statement, because he says economics should be a positive science, in which he, by the way, discloses a couple of things. First of all, economics is not a positive science, because if it were, you wouldn't need these sentences, because physicists don't go around saying physics should be a positive science, because it is. Whereas in economics, we have quarrels about, it should be. There you admit that it isn't. And also by saying that economics should be value-free, well, value-free is also a huge value, by the way. It's a huge value for economics. So this is where the whole religious sort of normative thing gets smuggled in. And I have nothing against normative. I have nothing against religious. What I do have against is trying to pretend that this is the holy truth, which is really, in fact, what we do in economics. Okay, I have exhausted my 34 minutes. And now I think I said enough of controversial things to stir a debate. But of course, I don't know, when was this book published? Yes?
Last week.
Last week. So you had a lot of time to read it. But so anyway, so the floor is yours.
So what about these economists who won the Nobel Prize in economics, say that people are non-rational, like in game theory?
Yeah. Perfect. Or behavioral economics. Yeah, this I think is the perfect example of we know that human beings don't behave in a rational way, but still we teach it. And the way we do it in economics, and I think this is sort of also interesting, we teach for 3 years mainstream, and then as a paradox, or alternative school, we talk about, for example, gifts. Yeah, this is a big topic of behavioral economics. Gift is a conundrum to economics. It's a paradox. It so happens that gift is a paradox only for economists. To a normal person, giving gifts is no paradox. It just happens. It's only a paradox to somebody like me who was trained for 3 years to teach that human beings shouldn't give gifts. That they should, in fact, it's more rational to give money to, but we don't. So how is this possible? How come human beings? Because it doesn't really fit our models. But giving gifts is not the paradox. The paradox are the models. But this is sort of hard to realize when you've been trained this many years. So my answer to this question is myths are not disputed by facts. Myths are only disputed by other myths. You can have, and this is a perfect example, we have a myth. And by the way, the word myth doesn't have a negative connotation for me. Story, a belief system, something that we hope to be true. And in economics, we hope this to be true. You cannot exchange the founding myth just because facts don't work. In other words, the Greeks, they didn't really believe that there's a chariot carrying the sun from the morning till the evening, but they simply had no better explanation. Same like we have it today. We know that human beings are not rational, but we don't have a better explanation. So yes, the chariot actually, when you ask, does carry the sun. Again, myth is something that never happened, but is happening always. A good example of this is the way we talk about sunrise and sunset. The word sunrise comes from geocentric model of the universe, yeah, because the Earth and the sun rises. But we know very well that it's the other way around. So the sun doesn't really rise. The Earth, how should I say? We should say the Earth sort of tilts in the morningy way, but the sun does not rise. And yet we still, how do you say it in Polish? How do you say east in Polish? No, see? And west? Západ. So you have it like in Czech. Západ slunce. But I mean, yeah, but it doesn't, but the myth carries on. So we know very well.
Until Copernicus.
Yeah, but we still.
What about economics? Maybe also this myth is until
Yeah, exactly. But this is even with this wording, we know it doesn't set, but we still use the word it sets. That's my point. It's sort of a setrvačnost. It's sort of a inertia of the belief. Yeah, for example, also, we know gravity is really not, Newtonian gravity is not really how the world works because of Einstein, but we still sort of use it because it's convenient. But in economics, it's worse because we haven't had Copernicus yet. Or maybe a little bit in Keynes, little bit, with his idea of animal spirits. This is a practical example. I just had this debate in Hamburg 3 weeks ago. I was talking with people who model these behavior of markets, stock markets, and I said, wait a minute. When you say the price of gold is overvalued, you are saying really much more than just what you say, because you are really saying that the price of gold is overvalued. In other words, the value of gold is here, but the price of gold is here. So, in this, you claim many things. First of all, you claim that you know the true value of things. That's a very, very bold claim. Secondly, you know this, something that the market doesn't know. You have some sort of secret eyes into the true ontological essence of things. Thirdly, this has been given to you by some model that you've created, or maybe you do it from coffee. And most importantly, you're saying the markets are wrong. This is ironic because this statement you can hear every day in radio, TV, usually by people who believe in rational markets. Why? Because they model them. So in one sentence you're saying, I have a model that models rational behavior of the markets, and in the same sentence you're saying the markets are irrational because they are overshooting or undershooting the value constantly. This you cannot say. So I was asking them, well, the markets are irrational, each one of them, animal spirits, sentiments, and making even jokes out of it. I say, okay, so you agree, how can you then model it if it's irrational? Because the very definition of irrational is it is not rational. It is not mathematical. It is not behaving according to laws if it's irrational. Irrational people behave irrationally. You cannot predict their behavior. So that's another example of on one hand, we know that it's irrational, but on the other hand, we also know that it's rational. And both of it cannot be together. So until we have another completely different myth that will be able to, or story or model, however you want to call it, to replace the existing myth, we will still keep believing in things in which we know we shouldn't believe. This is like, I don't know, with Christianity or atheism or any other belief that you have. You have many objections towards whatever you believe, but you still believe it.
It sounds like the wisdom of Proverbs.
Yeah.
You have Proverbs for any situation.
Precisely. This I think is the first postmodern text. It is not wrong to build, it is not wrong to destroy. The only difference is there's time. There's time for every purpose under heaven. So what the Ecclesiastes is really saying is there is no absolute good and evil, only the time makes it good or evil. It is time to sow, it is time to reap. It is time to make love, it is time to kill. None of it is good or bad, it's just the determinant there is time. That's a very postmodern way of thinking, but that's a great point with Ecclesiastes. Yes, please.
Maybe the problem is connected with the definition of utility, because I think that maybe wider this, it could be more, closer to truth. Like, for example, with this giving gifts example, Now, if I give a gift, it's not rational for my wealth, but it could be rational for my pleasure, for my position in society, or something like this.
That's exactly the problem. If you define utility too broadly to include everything, you end up with tautology. So, for example, to do a very simple, stupid Popperian example of a test of a theory is falsification. So give me an example, how could I possibly, in my imagination, falsify the homo economicus maximization theorem? Okay, for example, let's imagine I give away all my money. Am I egoist? Yes, of course, because I increased my utility, because my utility was to not have any money. If I sacrifice myself for mankind, Jesus in that case was also egoist, because it brought him increased utility, because he in fact cared more for others than for himself. So there you kind of end up, okay, so altruists are also egoists, because it's for an altruist, it increases utility to create goodness for others and harm themselves. So that, if you define it narrowly, then it is a scientific sentence. Let's say utility in terms of material wealth. If I define that, then it's a scientific sentence, but obviously it only is true 60% of the time. And we don't know which 60. And it's not really a very nice theory if you say, well, this is an absolute truth, which only works 60% of the time. There's this beautiful sentence by somebody who said, I know that 80% of the money that I give to PR companies and to advertisement is wasted, but I don't know which 80. So you keep doing it. So that's one point. Secondly, you said a very interesting thing. You said there is another rationality outside of rationality. And that's exactly the problem of economics. What sort of rationality will you employ? So either there's a rationality of me trying to gain, or there's a rationality of me trying to maybe increase the utility of my family or of my country or of the whole world. But these rationalities are completely different, and sometimes they are in complete conflict. So there we say there are different logics. You can see this also in theoretical physics, that the logic that governs the behavior of subquantum particles is completely against everyday logic. There, particles travel against time. There is an imaginary time that often very goes backwards. Thing can be a wave and a particle at the same time. That doesn't really make sense. And it doesn't. But on some level of logic, so we can get philosophically to what's logical about logic. And more, even if I may, one sort of way of looking at this is I could even claim that economics is in fact an altruistic science or field. Why? Let's start with the very beginning, Adam Smith and the famous butcher example. This all of you. Adam Smith says, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher that I have my meat, but because of his self-love. And him, by following his self-love, really increases the utility of the whole. This is sort of the invisible hand of the market and self-utility principle connected. This is actually, have you ever stopped to think about it? Why did Adam Smith say the second part of the sentence? He says, it is good for the whole. Well, if we're egoists, why should we care for the whole? Why didn't he just say, well, the butcher just gives me meat because it's good for him, period. Whoops. Because it's good for him. And he's an egoist and he doesn't care for the whole. No. And this is, again, you hear this in the media every day. It is better for the whole for us to be egoistic. So in a way, this poor butcher wants to be an egoist, but damn it, I did it again. I was altruist. I couldn't help it. And this, in fact, is the principle of the invisible hand of the market. No matter how sinister or evil or egoist you try to do, you are increasing the utility of the whole. So in a way, all our argumentation or our logic is really appealing to the altruist side. Growth is good, this is, I love this because this is sort of an argumentation that you hear especially from the extreme, right? We need growth. Why? Well, for the poor. Oh, okay. So suddenly the poor are important, yeah? Yeah. Otherwise, the poor would suffer. Okay. We need to grow because of China and because of Africa. We need to pull the whole world out. And so, they're not, if a true right-winger should say, we have to grow because we want to be richer. Period. No need to put altruism into that sentence because you don't believe in altruism. This would be an answer to Ayn Rand or Spencer, more appropriately. The rules of the jungle, the survival of the fittest, again, it's good for the whole. The best win. How? And this is another example of tautology. Well, how can you know which one is the best until he becomes the best? Okay, so you have two companies, A and B. Which one is the best? We don't know. Let the market decide. And the market decides for A, and then that makes it always the best. And that's, of course, and if the B wins, B was the best. A true way to how to test this hypothesis would to have some sort of an outside measure to say, well, A is really better than B, and now let's see if market selects A. That would be the proper way of testing the hypothesis whether market selects the better or not. But it's again down in a tautological way. The best is not selected because it was best, but the other way around, if you see the tautology there. Yeah. Thank you, that's a great question. Okay, beer time?
I would like to ask you, I didn't mention it when we met outside, but could you explain more, how do you cope in the business world? Because as we know, you work for a bank as a chief global strategist, yes?
Chief macro strategist, not global. So at least 40.
And you write about all these things, about the fallibility of mathematics and economics, and how do you cope to do business knowing that it's that it doesn't work as it should, that the banking and the work of an economist shouldn't be so like you would like to be.
Yeah, no, precisely. I don't think I would do a world a better service if I became a monk, living in a desert or in a cave, eating, dried cockroaches and saying these things. I think the system has to be changed or criticized or from within. And that's exactly the position from which I want to do it. These things that I'm saying, many people have said exactly in the position of a monk. But that really didn't lead us, in a way, anywhere. So I think exactly I have to be in the middle of the system to see that. Let me give an example, for example, interest rate. Yeah, this is the whole idea, the key idea of banking. And my bank actually likes it this way. Because they know, everybody who has a little bit of brain in between their ears knows that the system, the way it is not sustainable. And something needs to be done. Even the very topic of Davos was always the sort of the masturbation place for capitalism. Even today, this year, the topic was the great transformation. Looking for new models. In other words, if you read this religiously, repentance. In Greek, it means metanoia, looking for new ways, changing the ways, looking for new models. We somehow did something wrong, we believed the wrong thing, now we need to change it, and it's better that we do the change than somebody else from the outside. That's sort of a utilitarian way of looking at it. But let's focus on interest rate. Throughout the history of mankind, it doesn't really matter what culture you look in. Old Testament, Holy Quran, Vedas, Hammurabi Code, Aristotle. Don't know about Confucius, I'm still reading him, but there I haven't found anything yet. But otherwise, in most of the founding culture of the West, there is this sentence, do not use interest rate, and if so, minimize the usage of interest rate. For some reason that it's quite difficult for us to understand. In the Bible it simply says don't give loans to your brother at an interest, period. Doesn't really argue why not. Aristotle argues a little bit in the book of Politics, this is why you shouldn't do it, you know, da-da-da-da-da. Now I don't want to go into the details, but he gives some reasons there. Today we have made interest rate, you know, fast forward 4,000 years, today we've made interest rate a founding pillar, if you will, of our system, especially of banking. But other systems as well, the whole idea of public finance, I mean, it's also quite impossible for you, I think, to imagine, and me, our lives without interest rate, etc. It allows us to drive in cars that aren't ours. It allows us to live in houses that are not ours. This is called mortgage, etc., etc. So it's a great tool, but the problem is we don't know how to use it. My essential problem here is that we cannot, and I'm coming back to mathematics, we cannot calculate interest rate. I mean, sorry, we can calculate it, but we can calculate it very exactly, which doesn't mean we know, which doesn't mean we know what it is. Stupid example, if we could calculate interest rate for Greece properly, there wouldn't be a problem. Because, oh my God, I mean, we've been lending for 100 years to hundreds of different countries. Suddenly one of them goes bankrupt. Yeah, this is why we have our risk models for. This is why we have risk premium for. This is why we have credit default. This was the idea of credit default swaps. I insure, so the story goes, I, as, I don't know, bank or a financial institution, lend money to you as a Greek government, knowing perfectly well that the risk up against me, sorry, is that you will go bankrupt and that you will not pay me the money because Greece cannot run away. So the only option there is you'll go bankrupt. This is the risk that I'm taking upon myself, and this is what I'm getting the money for. I mean, in every stupid economic textbook, this is the trade-off. I get whatever risk premium of, let's say, just 2% or 1% because I am actually faced up with the risk. But when this risk actually materializes, the whole thing crumbles. So it's like a car with an airbag that works always except for car crashes. But otherwise, it's always absolutely to the millimeter functional. Everything is calculated. You don't have to worry. But it doesn't work when you crash it. It's like an umbrella that's always good except for when it rains. But carry it with you just in case. But it's a little bit, you know, it doesn't stop the water. That's the problem. We think we understand it. And again, I have nothing against interest rate. That's why I can work in a bank. My problem is if you use a tool that you don't understand to trigger happily. I know that when I'm dealing with a knife, that it's sharp, that it's dangerous. And that's what interest rates are. It's very sharp, it's very dangerous, and it can lead to bankruptcies of the system. So what we've done is, because exactly these mathematical models did not decrease improbability. They made it look like, uncertainty. It made it look like uncertainty doesn't exist. So this is the way it worked. I made a safe deal with you. I lend you money, and I insure the money by a credit default swap with an insurance company. So I have zero risk, because if you go default, you pay it to me. So I'm getting free 1% a year. So it looks like an absolutely bulletproof, risk-free deal. What in fact happened in my thesis is that we've exported the uncertainty into the system. That's why the whole system is crumbling down. Because the uncertainties were stuck in the cracks of specialization of the system. So when you go bankrupt, the worry is not about me and you, the worry is about the system. When you're driving a car that you don't understand, let's imagine you have a car in which the brake and the gas swaps randomly. Okay? How would you drive such a car? Yeah, it's a dangerous car, but you want to drive. It's also quite useful, but sometimes it just swaps according to some algorithm or completely chaotically. How would you drive such a car?
Be ready.
Very slowly and be ready that, you know, once it adds and once it stops. So you would drive it very, very carefully. We took a car like this and we drove it like mad. You know, there's this beautiful song by Jethro Tull, by Aerosmith, sorry, Living at the Edge. You know, and if you live on the edge for too long, you mustn't be surprised when that edge cuts you. Because the probabilities are both-sided. It's like when you ski. I don't know how many of you ski. It's a sort of a very typical Czech pastime hobby. The best way how to ski is on the inside of the inside leg on the edge. But there, of course, you're much more vulnerable because most people ski have most of their weight on the outside leg because if there is some uncertainty on the surface, they can always use the second leg to balance it. But when you have your weight here, there is nothing to break your fall if the surface, for example, changes a little bit. So it drives much faster, and you can do a better curve, but it's also very volatile to fall. And that's what we've edged it, and we were surprised when we fell off that edge. Yeah.
What do you think about Islamic banking? There is no interest rate.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a question that I often get, and it's a completely different model of banking. It's much more participatory because what they do is they sort of kind of venture, buy sort of a stock, maybe. That's, I think, the easiest way how to describe it to us. And they, so also those banks will never be able to be so impersonal like ours. So they sort of co-project it with you. Which results in much more stability and much less growth, which I think in a way is exactly what we should need. And also what it cannot do, it cannot really drive this money multiplicator as much as the way our European banks are made. You know that banks are also participating in money creation process because they lend out 100 zloty many times. Whereas in this case, it's not that easy. So it makes the system more robust, but also slower, which I think is, to me as an economist, working at the bank, working for the government, my first responsibility is not to go bankrupt for my country, for Europe, and for my bank. You know, Friedman also famously said that the role of a company is to only concentrate on profit, not to do anything else. This is the task of a company. Yeah, okay, but if you grow and create all this sort of social good, and then in one day you go bankrupt, you may quite well destroy all the good that you've been creating for 12 years, and you know, bailing out and actually getting people unemployed, or maybe even destroying the local competition or the local environment. You can end up creating more evil than good that you did for the 12 years. So I'm not sure about exactly the Islamic way of banking, but I think it could serve as a huge inspiration. But what we definitely need is a slower usage of interest rate, if at all, and more careful handling with knives that we can't really handle, because we cannot. We've kind of learned this, but still we are calculating. Even we were calculating credit default swaps, even though we knew this was interesting before the Greek bailout. I mean, the forgiveness of Greek debts. There was this huge debate whether we should even. If you remember, there was the sentence in every press release, this must have hit your eyes, that the write-off is voluntary. In every single mention, the word voluntary was there. Why? Because if it wouldn't be voluntary, it would technically qualify as bankruptcy, and the whole mechanism of credit default swaps would be started, and we were afraid that it would collapse. So again, it was insurance that worked always, except when there was actually a problem. Yes, please.
I'd like to come back to rationality. You said that some people that talk in media and so on are kind of sure about their theses. I mean,
They're what? Their thesis, yeah.
They do believe that the market is rational because of their models, right?
Yeah.
As you said. So I think they are not sure, like conscious about the fact that it will change in some time, right? So, it's like they create a model for a period of time.
Yeah.
But has started like 2 weeks ago and will end in one year or something. So even our professors, if we ask them why, they said it depends and don't. So it's also the answer. I don't know what assumptions I should use to focus on, right?
Yeah.
So it's like no economist will say that his thesis is rational, and he's sure about this, I think.
Yeah, well, yes and no. Again, first I'm going to answer in a light way, and then I'm going to answer in a more serious way. Whenever they ask the economist, for example, I get this stupid question asked all the time, what should I invest what will be the future price of gold, for example? Yeah. I always deny this question, but some of my colleagues don't, and this is the way they do it. Of course, I don't know what the price of value will be next year. Don't be silly. I don't have a crystal ball, but 3.4. In between that, they use a lot of, let's assume that 3.4. So, of course, every journalist skips the first 95% because that's nonsense and says, okay, analysts estimate the price of gold to be 3.4 in 2 quarters. So that's the sort of a funny answer. Now the serious answer. There is, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars going into the research of the future price of petrol or crude oil, which is, in a way, sort of simple. Easy demand, easy supply, should be very easy to see in the future, no close substitutes, demographics also able to calculate in the future. So this should be a very easy case, unlike the price of gold, for example, which has many substitutes and many sort of uses, but petrol should be simple. Still, nobody came up, and rest assured, if somebody kind of cracks the code, then he would be a millionaire immediately, or she. And millions of hundreds of dollars are invested into this, and it never materializes. So if, this is my advice to anybody who is a prophet, if you ever happen to hit a right prophecy, the best thing is to do never prophesy again, because it was accident. This is the very famous case by this Goldman Sachs prediction of the the prices of oil. There was this guy who said, the prices of oil will go up, and they did. And so he was suddenly a god, and they asked him a second time, okay, what now? What now? Now it's 80 a barrel. What will happen? Oh, it will go to 200. Oh, okay, 200. Of course, 2 weeks later, it went down to 60 or something and stayed there. So, his folly was not the first prediction. His folly was the second prediction. An even more fundamental answer is, this is like wanting to know, in a horse race, like wanting to know which horse will win. Of course, we all want to know it, but the moment and this is why it's philosophically impossible to do what you the question you posed. It's philosophically, not just math, it's philosophically impossible for the following reason. Everybody wants to know which horse would win. If we knew which horse would win, the whole betting would be senseless. So if we all knew the future price of gold, it would be senseless to have a capital market.
I mean, about the focus on a period of time.
Yeah, okay, so if we all knew that in the year 2030, the price of gold will be, I don't know what, $1,000 per ounce, then the trading with gold would stop. If we really, really knew this. If it'd be generally accepted. But what's happening is there is a fight of beliefs. I believe because that the price of gold will go up. Well, I believe that the price of gold, this is where the fun comes in. Whenever we two trade, there has to be an absolute agreement on the price. Because if I'm selling you this pen, I cannot sell it to you for $5 and you buy it for 10. I mean, the price has to be equal, absolutely to the last millimeter. Otherwise, it's even fundamentally ungraspable. You can't give me $10 and I can only take 5. So there has to be absolute unity over the price, but at the same time, for any transaction to occur, there must be a fundamental disunity about the value. Because I will only sell you this pen if I believe that the price of this pen is higher than its value. And you will buy it only when you believe that the value of this pen for you is higher than its price.
When we look at this example, I'm working in business already for many years. And the longer I work, the more I understand the decision about the contracts, are emotional, and then cognitive. Not cognitive and then it's... So it is... And then, if we can read about imperfect knowledge economy, that people, as you said, in the models, they should be rational, but they don't understand the models, they make wrong assumption, and finally the result is unpredictable.
Yeah.
So, but we have model like we have, so I mean, the between blind one eye man is king. But what about behavioral economics, to add this behavioral, emotional part to economy and to build something new?
Yeah. No, perfectly. We have been trained, and this is a fundamental problem, we have been trained since the time of Plato, so it's one of the biggies, so to speak, to think in emotional versus rational. In fact, why are you sitting here? Is that an emotional decision or is it a rational decision?
Emotional.
100% emotional? That's exactly the problem. We can't say. And you can go through your day and you can ask every decision that you're making, every situation you're in, ask yourself a question, is it irrational? Am I here sitting rationally because I want to promote my book? Or is it also because I love it? So it's never clear. And it's even, I think there is even a deeper trick here. Let me give you two dramatic examples. Love, marriage. Love is supposed to be emotional, and it is. Yet, of course, it's also a little bit rational. I mean, every marriage or every long-term relationship, you love her and everything, but you also know that she is not exactly poor, she's got both legs, and she has the right amount of eyes, which is 2. And that her parents are not, terrorists, and et cetera, et cetera. These things you sort of rationally know, but you would never admit them. In a way, if I told you, if I may, that you married your partner for rational reasons, it would be an insult. Because, so, in the sphere of emotions, we do have rational reasons. We don't know if it's 10, 15, or 38.6%, but we are ashamed of them, and we don't talk about it. And the same is in the other extreme, for example, I don't know, cell phones or things that I buy. If I told you that if you told me that I bought this phone because of an advertisement that was or even more stupidly, this is a rational decision, but I also love my phone. I'm really 10, 15%, I'm in love with my phone, but I would never admit that. So even in this sort of an extreme example, you see even in completely emotional areas, we do have rational components, and in completely rational areas, such as model choice or decisions about whether I should buy gold or silver, we have emotional components, but it was taboo for a long time to talk about it. And there was yet another, even mathematics, I would go as far as to say that when we were studying mathematics, it was an emotion. When I first heard 1 + 1 = 2, I remember when I was small and I was adding 2 + 3, I didn't know if I should start adding from the beginning of 2 or from the end of 2. Because in one case, 3 + 2 would be 4 if I start at the beginning of 2. And if I start at the end of 2, it would be 5.
What age you were?
That was, I don't know, 2. Or 3. Somebody had to tell me, no, you add up to the end of 2. 1, 2. And I learned this. It took me a little time to learn. And then because the society, every time I said 1 + 1 = 2, said, yes, here's your candy, I sort of repeated it till that emotion hardened, in a way, to the fact that today I consider it rational. But in the beginning, it was an emotion. That's why we had to study it. It's not God-given. You don't get born and, do your things. On the other hand, love, which is an extremely emotional area, after 2,386 kisses with your darling, it's not emotional anymore. It becomes, this love still exists, but it's sort of rational love, which doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It simply doesn't do anything emotional to me anymore. I will miss her very much when I get deprived of her, but as long as she's there, it's sort of automatic. Yeah, of course, we kiss her when I come home. But again, I don't mean to say that one is better. It's a man thing, yeah. I don't mean to say that one thing is better than the other, but what I'm trying to say that there's a continuum between emotions and reason. So it's difficult.
Woman economist, then let's talk about.
Well, last I checked, I'm a male. No, but it's interesting actually. Aristotle, when he first defined economics, he was writing for ladies. If you read on economics, it's really for housewives. How this science of running a house became a male, masculine-dominated area where we, for example, talk of competition, but we don't talk of cooperation.
It's abstract, nothing to do with how to run the house.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And there is many beautiful books on this, for example, by Darren McCloskey. Yeah, I mean, you can, many have done this. You can run down a whole anthropology of how economy is sort of very, male, phallus-oriented science. It is not embracing. In businesses, 90% of the time, what you do is you cooperate. Only 10% you compete. Yet we always talk about competitive economics, not cooperative economics. I think if ladies would be in charge, they would more look at it from the... I'm not worried. Yes. To forecast. Can we switch? If you can just speak loud because there is this air and I can poorly hear you.
Switch
I would like
off
to come back to the forecast for a moment. If I understand well, you don't really believe in the forecast.
No. I believe them. This is the problem. It's a belief. No, not a problem. It's not a fact. It's a belief. As long as we treat it like this, like a prophecy, then that's cool.
So this is the way how you manage to work as an economic advisor?
I don't do future. I don't do future for my bank. I don't do future for the media. I think nobody should. I think we would be better off, and that's the point of this book, we would be better off without these forecasts.
So you manage to do your work without forecasting, actually? you
Absolutely,
managed
yeah.
to do it also in case of being the advisor of listopada.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you do it?
Well, do you know what's going to happen to you tomorrow? Can you manage to live your life? And okay, to give you a little bit even more radical example, GDP. Okay, that's the meta statistic. But when you transpose it into, everybody's interested, but when you transpose it into your personal area, it becomes irrelevant. So your personal GDP, did it increase or decrease last year?
Ask your wife.
Remain constant.
0.0? Are you kidding? Seriously? You don't know? How many of you know whether your personal GDP went up or down 2010 to 2011? You? How much? By how much? Come on, up. How much? No, exactly. To the decimal point. I mean, come on, if I do a prediction, GDP will go up about, I don't know, 50%, everybody will laugh at me. I have to be very precise. That's the trick. When I don't know the answer, I give it to the last decimal unit. If they call me from the media and say, what's the GDP going to be next year? I would say, I don't know, plus, minus, somewhere between -2 and 6. They would go, oh my God, you're an idiot. Oh, sorry, I apologize. 3.21. Oh, okay, thank you. Bye.
But you can calculate.
Exactly, it's very easy, but none of you gives a damn. And that's exactly my point, nor do I. You can find it in 5 minutes. Just look into your, well, assuming your tax return sort of follows your real income. You just look into your tax return and you divide one by the other. This is extremely simple. That's exactly the point. But we do not care. But then when it becomes GDP of Poland, completely irrelevant in your life, much more relevant is your personal GDP, then some magic happens and it becomes a reason to start a war. This is what's happening with Greece. But on a personal level, we don't give a damn. And that's exactly sort of the lure of economics. I can perfectly say, yeah, I expect GDP to grow by 2.3%. That's a safe guess. But what good is this to me? I can I can do all fiscal and all monetary policy even without that. But it will have to be safer fiscal policy, safer monetary policy. It would not allow me to edge it so much. I would have to be somewhere here.
So we don't do forecasting, but we do some kind of positive work, not normative.
No, I do normative economics.
But in your work with clients, with Havel, you do positive. You say, for example, you advise how should it be.
That's normative.
And that's normative.
Should be is normative.
I'm not an economist, excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
But you advise how should the system work, yes?
Yeah. And that's a normative endeavor. The system should work better, it should be more just. Those are normative statements. And that's fine.
That is how the whole science of economy should be. Without the quest work, or is this how you think it should work?
How do we do it?
Then you should do the normative work.
Well,
Without the modeling.
yeah. In fact, it is already normative. The only thing we have to do is to admit it. I take the last question, and then I'm afraid we're running out of time. Yeah.
I think the last remark.
Oh, sorry. You also wanted to say something?
No.
Oh, okay.
The last remark actually proves that the economy, to some extent, is normative, as you said. And going back to this discussion and debate whether it's positive or normative, I would just like to share my experience. Because right now I'm writing a PhD thesis, and it's really good, interesting topic. But because of belief that good piece of work should have very strong mathematical background, I'm still thinking how to put everything in numbers and to make it, to produce some good mathematical model to explain all the things that I actually would do better in words. But just because of belief that it should be mathematical and it should be proved in this way. And I wonder how many of you are facing similar problem. And another thing is because I'm teaching macro and microeconomics to students.
You're teaching? Yeah.
I'm teaching, yes, and I find it really difficult to explain how exactly these models work, taking into consideration 10 assumptions. And just imagine that it is real, but just assume that everything happens at the time. But finally, as a result, analyzing the whole models and everything doesn't make really sense to me as personally, but I'm still continuing to make it because of I'm economist. Yeah.
There is a beautiful joke about this from the Czech communist regime, that there's two teachers of Marxism and Leninism, and one comes to the other and says, listen, I've been teaching this Marxist theories for 20 years and I still don't understand them. They don't make any sense to me. And the second says, well, why don't you take a bottle of wine and, tomorrow come to my home and I'll explain it to you. And the second says, you idiot, I can explain it too, but I don't understand it. So I think this is sort of the problem. To explain it, that's easy. Everybody can do it. If you want me to employ, steroids and Martians and ghosts into it, no problem. Yeah. And you even said it. I don't believe it. Alternatively, you could always also say, I believe it. I believe these models. And you also said, I don't believe them because I don't understand them.
Well, I understand them personally, but they are so...
or they don't make sense or something?
Yes, they are senseless. That's the problem. I really understand it because they are simple, yeah? You put here something, something here, something is happening, this depends on this, and it's easy to understand, but it's because of assumptions, it doesn't make any sense. It has nothing in common with reality, that's the problem.
You have to bring the peace to the readers.
Yeah, but we are looking at the whole process and different things that are happening in reality, just as pictures,
And even notice that these calculations are completely useless. Because at the end of the day, you come up with the star thing, but what have I really calculated? You can really employ these calculations only in a very abstract case. Now, let me actually, this reminds me of Alfred Marshall. The whole demand and supply thing was invented by Alfred Marshall. He also wrote the Principles of Economics, which was, before Samuelson, really the Bible of economics. For more than 50 years, he was also the teacher of Keynes. And he first used mathematics in economics, but in the following way. He, first of all, very famously said, burn the mathematics. I don't know if you heard about this. He wrote a letter to his friend explaining exactly what you speak of. He said, it's in my second book, it's really quoted word from word. It's absolutely stunningly interesting. He said, Alfred Marshall is writing this to his colleague teacher. Use English. If it's helpful, use mathematics. 3, burn the mathematics. 4, if nothing remains, the method is wrong. And he used mathematics only I went through the book and there is, now I don't know exactly, it has around 600 pages and in it is around 20 graphs. Compared to Samuelson, where you have more graphs than pages. And the only way he used mathematics was in an appendix. And it was sort of with this sort of rhetorics, for idiots that can't understand it in proper plain English, for autists, there is the appendix and you can do it in a mathematical way, but otherwise for normal people, English is enough. And my last comment to your observation is, mathematics, we say it's a different language, and I take that, I think that's fine. And I'm not fundamentally against mathematics, I'm fundamentally against overusage of mathematics. And this is the problem with mathematics. If I'm speaking to in Czech, or if I start speaking to in Polish or in German or in English, the topic of my discourse shouldn't change. But if I'm using the language of mathematics, the topic of the discourse changes. Because there, for example, I cannot talk about love in mathematics. So that's the problem. If I'm talking in plain English, and if I have to translate it to mathematics, the discourse changes. And I will end with this, maybe if I may. You know, we have values in life. Some of those values have a price, a number. Others do not have a number. So this has a number, and it I don't know how much could this cost. 6 zloty? 2. Okay, good. 2 zloty. Okay, I open, and I drink a little bit. You can't sell it anymore. So now it doesn't have a price. Why? Because I touched it. So
In this environment.
in this environment. So some values in our life, and this is a true value. I mean, having bottled water is a value, and I'm ready to pay 2 zloty for that. This is a value that has a price. This is a value that has a price. This is a value that has a price. There are also some values that do not have a price. Friendship, clean air, love, aesthetics, many things. Now, no matter how sophisticated your mathematics is, if you're running down your mathematics on this sort of, I don't know how much of it, is it 30% or 20% or 5%? Are the 5% more important than the 95%? That's also possible. No matter how sophisticated your mathematics will be, your results will always be leaping on one leg because simply you are not putting everything into the equation because you cannot. It's like paying for a bill without the main course, because we don't know how much the main course costs. So that's the problem with mathematics, I mean with economics and mathematics, is that by applying mathematics we automatically limit the scope. We become more exact, yeah, but we of course come up with results such as 42. Okay. Good, okay. Thank you very much for your attention.